Hello, my friends. This is life coach Mike Trugman, and welcome to an episode of Mike's Search for Meaning. I'm after some big questions. Why are we here? What makes a fulfilling life? How can we grow individually and collectively? Each episode, I'll dive deep with leaders who are doing great work in the world and see how they organize their life. Books read, value systems, resources used, and stories that show how each of you can create the life and the world of your dreams. Chrystal, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yes, it's so nice to have you here. I'm really looking forward to, man, we teed up so many things that I'm really jazzed up about, and we'll see what we actually get to. But as you know, I like to start my conversations in the same manner. And it's kind of a two-parter. I want to know what you were like as a child. So keeping that in the back of your mind. The first question I ask every interview is, what was it like at your dinner table when you were growing up?
Mm. Well, Mike, first of all, it's so good to be here with you. And I really, really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to our conversation. And as I think back on my childhood and what was it like at my dinner table, I'm drawn back to the time when I was living with my grandparents. My sister and I lived with my grandparents and my aunts and uncles from the time I was about 8 until I was 12. And I think those are some of the fullest, richest dinners that I remember from my childhood because there were lots of us and there was always family around. And my grandparents, both my grandmother and my grandfather cooked. And so while we didn't always love the food, what we did love was being with them and being with cousins and aunts and uncles. And we were very close knit. My grandmother's 9 brothers and sisters lived in the same town that we lived in. And so everyone was always coming over. And so it never really felt like it was just us. It was always cousins, aunts, uncles, friends, people would drop in. Um, we were I think, pretty casual in terms of having people casually stop over.
Mhm.
It was never a big deal and there was always enough food. So that's what I remember from my childhood. And I don't I don't remember the conversations really. I just remember us checking in on each other and
Mm.
seeing how everyone was doing. And we didn't get into any lengthy discussions about politics, but it felt really, really relational. And so that's what I remember of my childhood dinners growing up and
Mm.
sitting around the table and just big meals and a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. It evokes for me, like a lot of times in movies when dinner is portrayed, there's lots of different flavors of what a dinner table experience might look like. I don't know if you ever saw Sopranos, but the TV show The Sopranos, it's kind of a stale dinner table. You can tell that they all have, lives outside of the family that they're more enriched by, especially Tony. And the ones I'm most drawn to are kind of what you're describing. I'm getting this image of like really big family gathering and maybe a slogan or motto of everyone's welcome here. The casualness that you're describing of
Mhm.
any just come on in, plenty of food here. And
Yeah.
I love that. I love that kind of the vibe, the welcoming vibe that you're describing.
Yeah, it's actually making me go back. I do go back and visit my family every year and have done that for many, many years. They live a few thousand miles away across a number of states, but even now, like there's not one table that we all sit around. It doesn't feel traditional in that
Mhm.
sense. We might be sitting at different tables. There might be, we're out in the family room. There might be some people sitting at the couch, some people sitting at the table. We got plates of food. People are talking over each other.
Mhm.
There's crosstalk and lots of just really rich conversations. It is not a quiet dinner, but it feels rich and loving. And whenever I visit now, we usually bring the kids back so they get to taste some of that experience too. And the every time the night before I leave, we always do like a going away dinner, so that everyone can come by the house, and there's always, food on the stove, and you can drop in whatever, and you can drop in whenever. And it just feels very, very connected.
Mm.
Uh, and you just grab what you want to eat, and the TV might be on. Okay, the TV's always on. So there's the din of that noise, but yeah, those are it just feels like such a great memory, and a memory that I still get to live. Um, Even though my dinners here at home feel very different with our small nuclear family. But yeah.
Hmm. Well, before I get into the work that has largely shaped your professional life, I would love to also get to know a little bit about what you were like as a child.
Oh boy. I was a really curious child. Um, I love to observe, and I love to follow around adults to see what they were doing. And actually my nickname was Shadow as as a really young kid. And I didn't necessarily want to talk, or I wasn't very talkative. I didn't need to have a lot of conversation, but it was really about observing. And so I would observe my grandfather in the garden. I would sit next to my mom when she was reading. I'd go visiting with my grandmother. I just wanted to be near them. And so I was watchful. I was an observant kid. uh, I talked a little bit about curiosity, and my mom tells a story about the first time that she knew that I might, potentially be interested in science as a kid. I think it was about 3, and I had this. I think I had gotten a Fisher Price flashlight that had these little colored discs that you would slip in front of the light, and the discs were red, yellow, and blue, obviously the primary colors. And I was sitting on the couch, and my sister was sitting next to me. My sister was watching TV, and I discovered that if you put the blue disc in front of the yellow one, it would make green. And it like blew my mind at 3 years old. And my mom's like, it took you a while to be able to pronounce your R's. And so she remembers me saying, look, I made green. And it was so exciting. And I was playing around with all these colors, and putting the different discs in front of each other. And it, I was in awe, apparently. And that felt like, an early foray into my curiosity. Um, I was also really particular. Something that my family likes to remind me of now. But I liked things. I liked things to make sense, and I liked uh, things to be orderly and to make sense in my mind, even if my mind wasn't necessarily like what was on everyone else's mind. I just needed things in a particular way. So there was something like meticulous about my mindset as a kid. So yeah, intense would be the other word to describe me as a kid. And I think that's something that's definitely carried on into my adulthood, which I now embrace myself in the fullness of my intensity. But yeah, I was just I was curious and studious, and I had a great memory. I played concentration. I would beat everyone at concentration. Yeah. And I loved being outside. I loved the natural world, and making mud pies and mixing things together and seeing what would happen. So that was me as a kid.
Mm. We seem to share a lot in common, Chrystal. I One of my favorite memories with my paternal grandfather, who I don't have that many memories with, was playing concentration with him. And he wasn't the most complimentary person, but he appreciated the mind that I had. My memory, like yours, was very good. And concentration, for listeners who don't know, it's the full deck of cards is laid out on a table, and you have to match. Like if you pick up one random card and it's a 7, you have to try and match it with another 7. And the point of the game, right, is to to memorize where, okay, it didn't match I picked up a 7 and a queen, but now I know there's a 7 and a queen there. So if I pick up another 7, then I know I need to pick up that 7. I hope I'm doing it justice, but
Yeah.
I shared being particular as well. My parents joke with me that, you know, those plates that they're sectioned off. There's like one that takes there's a section that takes up half the plate, and then the second half of the plate is then sectioned off into quarters, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I would always have the protein in the big part, and then I didn't even eat vegetables because I was very particular, but it'd be one starch in its own corner of the plate and the other starch on the other part. None of the foods could touch. They had to be in the right order for me. So I share that with you.
Oh,
And
you are igniting so many, many memories right now. Yeah, yeah. Bruises on bananas, totally a no-go. Like my mother would literally bite the bruise off the banana and hand it back, and I would stop
Mhm.
crying. Oh, okay. Yeah, I can eat this now. So yeah, I'll add one more thing that I loved as a kid, and it was sports. It was athletic,
Mhm.
moving my
Mhm.
body. Um, that was another huge theme, and like playing organized sports starting when I was about, I don't know, 12 years old was really, really big and has been another theme throughout my life. But that's been with me since I was little. So yeah.
Beautiful. Well, it's time to talk forensics. And
Yeah.
I would say, based on how you described yourself as a child, I imagine that it made a lot of people around you weren't that surprised when you ended up in forensics. Is that right?
They were not surprised. You're right.
So how would you describe what brought you into forensics? And I know you spent a lot of time in that field. And so there's a lot of ways that you could address this question, but what were you most drawn to about forensics? And how would you say that has served the Crystal of today?
Hmm. I think what drew me in the most is that I've always had a deep love and reverence for mystery and also for questions, for inquiry. So that's really what took me in because I saw it as a path where I could look for and potentially find things that could not otherwise be seen.
Hmm.
And yeah, just being able to unearth what is not known. Um, and just adding up all of the, like, if I know this and I know this and I know this piece, like, how do those play together? And what does that mean in the context of this scenario or this case? So that's what really drew me in is that, just continuing my love of science and my love of inquiry and mystery. Uh, and I was also fascinated by the human body.
Hmm.
Um, so, there are many different subject matters or disciplines, as we call them in forensics. And, there's looking at firearms evidence, like bullets and guns, and there's DNA and there's fingerprints and toxicology and all sorts of other things. But what I was really drawn to was actually the stuff that involved the body. So I was a crime scene examiner and I was also a forensic biologist. So that meant I spent a lot of time looking for various body fluids. So yeah, I mean, I think when I was in college, I remember just being so fascinated by anatomy. And I had the opportunity to do a program where at the med school hospitals where we did a cadaver lab. And so just being as close to that as possible gave me that opportunity. So it was really just tapping into that love that I've always had since I was a kid. That's what drew me into forensics. And, I've had many people ask over the years about, well, didn't it gross you out or isn't it kind of creepy or disturbing? And for as disturbing as it can be to be a crime scene examiner, um, what was overshadowed by that was just my love of the questions and my love of like the body and figuring things out and answering those sorts of questions. So that is what pulled me in.
Yeah. So what I'm struck by right now is actually at a really high level. If I just said I'm really drawn to inquiry and mystery and the human body, you could say that about coaching too, right? That people in coaching love those things too, like the mystery, complexity of life, deep inquiry, curiosity, and the body seems really integral, at least in the coaching that has been most transformational in my vantage point and in my personal experience. A lot of it happens through the body. So I'm struck by that, but I would love to unpack. Like you were in forensics for what, 15 to 20 years or so?
20 years.
Yeah. And I imagine that for the better part of it, it was a very fulfilling career for you, that you learned a lot from it.
I did. Yeah. Hugely fulfilling. Lots of different experiences that are very unique and that, you know, most people in the world will never have, will never know what it's like to be behind the crime scene tape. Yeah.
Hmm. So a two-parter here is how did you most develop in your career in forensics? And then also like when did it start to feel like something else maybe is emerging here? Because you're not there
Mm,
anymore.
right. Um, I'm sorry. You're going to have to ask me the first part of that question one more time.
Yeah, how did you most learn, grow, and develop in the field of forensics?
I think the most learning and growth and development that I got was from just being responsible for really high stakes work, you know, where you don't want to make mistakes. And you know, there's something about getting it right.
Mhm.
Uh and being able to represent what you did, you know, whether that's in a court of law, whether it's in a report. And so that was tremendous learning for me, uh, just to step into the type of leadership that it takes to hold that much responsibility. Um, there's tremendous learning uh, from the work that I did doing homicide response and going to crime scenes. Because when you do that, like I would go out, sometimes I would be by myself, but often we were in teams of two. And people were waiting for you to get there so that you could do the really important piece of analyzing what happened. And so holding that kind of responsibility and also what it takes to stay centered and grounded and not be undone by what you're seeing and what you're experiencing and what you're witnessing. It just, that was huge growth for me. That was huge growth of like, how do I keep myself safe? How do I take on this tremendous responsibility and be a leader at this really important thing where you have one opportunity to do this? You have like one opportunity to get it right and to collect everything that you need to collect and to interpret and analyze everything that you need to interpret. And so there was really big learning for me there and stepping into my leadership seat. And let's see, there's more. Um,
Mhm.
the other piece of learning was about, you know, there's a lot of trauma in the work. And obviously as a crime scene examiner and working homicide cases, but also the work that I did as a biologist and working child abuse cases and sex crimes and physical assaults and you know what we think of as major violent crimes. And there was a way in which I could have chosen to kind of shut myself off to, and you know, there's a choice you need to make. Are you going to be cynical, or are you going to not be? And I think there was tremendous growth there because I had to figure out my own way, and I had to figure out how to do it in a way that felt like it was of integrity for me, which, contrary to some of the advice that I was given, I had to do things differently, and I didn't really have anyone to model how to do it differently, how to stay really human in the work, and also um, not to get overly emotionally involved, but to recognize that, I was a human too, and it was going to affect me, and I was going to carry this stuff with me. And so part of the learning was like, how can I do this, and how can I make it sustainable and still be the human that I want to be, and um not someone else's like bad projection or bad idea of what it means to do this, because I was given a lot of bad advice. I think that's a piece of what I'm saying here is I was given some bad advice. Shut off your emotions. When you go to homicide, it's just a body. When you go to an autopsy, it's just a body. Don't think about it. But I came in with such reverence for the body. And also knowing that I could never forget what it was like to be raised in a culture, in like Black American culture, and with my family in particular. And it's like this in many Black communities, but death rites and funeral rites were really sacred and really special. And so it was hard for me to operate differently in the realm of forensics than I would have in the world. That didn't feel aligned. So this is all to say, in answer to your question about the learnings, like just figuring out my own way to stay really human. I mean, there was so much learning and development, and walking into these situations that, would threaten to just bring you to your knees. But no, you needed to stay standing and do the work. So yeah, a lot of learning there for me. Taught me a
Very,
lot about life.
yeah, oh yeah. I was going to ask just very quickly, did you have intentional practices in terms of how you're able to stay human and centered in the face of, and I imagine there's practices in connecting with what you believe to be true and not listening to all of that bad advice that you got. Shut yourself
Mhm.
off. Don't feel emotions. Did you have practices at that time?
Not at first.
Mhm.
Yeah, when I first became a crime scene examiner in 2004, I did not, and that was in the early part of my career. I did not have practices, and I realized literally at my very first autopsy that I needed to develop them in order to do the work. And um, I didn't know at that time, and I couldn't know what they would look like. They just had to kind of unfold. But I started to develop practices just like on the job and in the moment. And as I took on more responsibility, and as my cases became more complex, and sometimes something really horrible would happen, like I would just like, let me see what I need to lean into so I can do this. So yeah, I developed them like on the job.
And in a quick out breath, what would you say were a couple that were really helpful? Because to anyone who's listening right now,
Mm.
I think whatever level of things we might be turning away from in our life, it doesn't have to be a
Mm.
dead body, but there's a lot of times that we are brushed up with something that we're unwilling to feel. Like it feels like it's too much for us. And having practices to be like, no, I actually want to build the capacity to be able to feel and be a human in this thing that's challenging for me. Like for me, conflict is a really big one. If someone
Hmm.
raises their voice at me, or even if I perceive that someone's not paying attention for me, really helpful for me to stay like centered in my body, in my heart, feeling like, yeah, that person, they might be ignoring me. and there's an uncomfortable sensation in my body. But anyway, all this is just pointing to the fact that this is really useful for anyone who's listening. And what are some practices that were helpful for you to stay centered and true to who you were?
Mm, I think the first one was when I would actually go to a crime scene, and the crime scenes that I went to were usually homicide investigations. When I would go, I would think of my entering the space and my presence there as as a sort of healing that was
Mm,
already starting.
mm,
Um, it wasn't, while there was all the enormity to deal with, and there's a family who's going to be there are families who are going to be affected and people who are going to be deeply impacted. And when part of my practice was to start to think of my entry into that crime scene as like, okay, now the healing can start. Even if no one ever knows it, even if I never speak it aloud, what I'm carrying with me in my orientation toward the work is that I can I can bring in an act of kindness to someone who died in an unkind way.
mm,
And that gave me tremendous um, power and control aren't quite the words, but it there was something that gave me some agency
mm,
about how I was going to show up. And so yeah, I mean, I also thought like, this person's family member is never going to know what happened behind the crime scene tape. But if I bring my full and open heart, and recognizing this person's humanity to it, like hopefully they will feel that in some way. I at least brought it into the air that I am breathing with this person in the place where they died. So that was a practice. Uh, and then the other one was just recognizing and sort of toggling between how I need to show up, uh, like what is required of me, what is my job here, and doing the job, like toggling between that and like how am I actually feeling inside,
mm,
and recognizing and not shutting down what I'm feeling inside, but it's almost looking one way towards here's the work I need to do, but then just gently turning my head back towards here's how I'm feeling, and then acknowledging how I'm feeling, like this is really awful, this really sucks, I got to take notes, I got to take photos. It was the toggle between the two that was really supportive for me. Like I can be here, there is something for me to do, but I'm also recognizing how this feels in the moment. So a body connection and a mind connection, and that going back and forth between them.
mm. Well, a lot of profound wisdom there. There's a lot of power in the story we tell about how we're showing up to things, and allowing our experience to be what it is, which is what I'm hearing in your response there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious what brought you into coaching. It seems like you had a career that you really loved and that you found value in, and it aligned in a lot of ways. And I know that we're ever evolving and changing, and our interests change, we change. So what brought you into coaching?
Let's see. Um, in my forensic career, I was a forensic scientist doing, casework. And then but I always had these like pretty solid leadership skills. And so I was tapped many times like, hey, do you want to do more? And I didn't really want to answer that call. I was like, no, no, no. I really like what I'm doing. I'm really good at this. I really love this. I don't want to manage people. Um, I don't want to manage people. I don't want to manage people. But but I would reach these roadblocks where it was like, I need more challenge. I want to do something different. I want to like, I want to walk towards that growing edge. And so there I found myself in an executive level management position uh as the quality assurance manager for forensics for 5 different labs and about 150 people. And the work was about making sure that that people got things right. And I had a lot of I'll say I had a lot of misconceptions about that particular role as a leader.
Mhm.
And so that was challenging, and I bumped up against them all the time. And so I realized like, oh my goodness, I need more skills. I need to skill up. Like I'm good at this and I belong here, but I need some other skills. And I didn't even know what coaching was at that time. And I happened to meet an executive coach. Um, and we started talking, and I was like, oh, there's this whole world out there. And so I started kind of playing around with that a little bit. And then in the meantime, after about 4 or 5 years in that position, I was promoted to director of forensics. So really in charge of like the whole show. And at that point, I was having a great time. It was a good move for me. I was learning a lot, but I was also starting to feel like I was bumping up against something that was knocking and calling about like there is something else here. There's something
Mm.
more. And eventually I was like, I don't think I need to be running a program. Like this doesn't feel like a useful this doesn't feel useful. It feels like there's something else for me to do. So it was really like my challenge with leadership and needing to learn new skills that brought me into coaching and an awareness of coaching, and that there were all these resources out there. And so when I started to dive into those, it just kind of ignited a bit of a fire in me. Um, and I could tell a little story about that.
Yeah, hell
Like,
yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, take your time.
So I actually met Jerry Colonna probably about 5 years ago. And this was Jerry is the CEO of Reboot, whom I work for now. And so I met Jerry at a gathering in California at a retreat center, the On Being gathering with Krista Tippett and a group of loyal listeners from across the globe that came together. And that's where I met Jerry. And we really connected, kind of hit it off. We stayed in touch. Um, Jerry actually invited me to a Reboot leadership immersive retreat that absolutely blew my mind. Um, and what I realized then was that I had been holding all of these questions that I didn't have the answers to, and I didn't even know how to access the answers, and I didn't know who could help with the answers. And so it was at that leadership retreat that things really changed for me. That is where I learned about coaching. And I didn't want to be a coach at that point. I just wanted some relief for my
Mhm.
soul. And so that was my first relationship with coaching in like the fall of 2018. And then the next year, Jerry invited me to facilitate a workshop with him. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I am not a coach. What are you even talking about? And he's like, no, 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 it'll be fun. And I remember what helped me feel really comfortable with it was a group of nonprofit leaders who were going to be at the same retreat center, 1440 Multiversity, where Jerry and I met. And I felt a lot of kinship to nonprofit leaders because, at the time I was a public servant, I was a state worker. Um, and so there was just something that felt really connected about that. And so we get to the workshop and it's like, I don't know, 2 or 3 days long. And Jerry said, why don't you do the intro? And then I'll talk for a bit. And so, we kind of had some things queued up. And I remember sitting on that stage with him, and I started in the intro, and I was literally like 5-10 seconds into it, and I felt like I had come home.
Hmm.
I was like, whoa, what is this? This feels really good. Um, of course, I didn't trust it right away. I was like, oh, that's just, adrenaline, dopamine, and whatever, because it went really well. But the more I thought about it, the more I considered it, the more I started to realize, like, this is what I've actually been doing. As director, I've been facilitating these conversations. I've been, you know, giving feedback and trying to create these conditions that will actually help us do this work in a healthier way, and in a way that where we can lean into the work that we love. And it felt like that's what I was doing as director. And the more it felt like that, the less it felt like the container of the state police could actually hold what I was growing into and what was emerging for me. This is all within the context of working within a law enforcement agency. So, which, comes with its own set of challenges with culture, funding, tradition. And it felt like what I was actually moving towards was out of alignment with the structure that was there. Sure, I could push the boundaries, and sure, I could do all of this. And I did. And I was really proud of that. That is one of the things that I am the most proud of. But I needed something bigger, and I needed more space for myself. So that is ultimately what brought me into coaching, was those experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Chrystal. There's a lot of different. We might bounce around a little here because I have lots of
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
curiosities. But something that we were talking about before we actually started recording this conversation, something I was pointing out to you was when I listened to you on other Reboot podcasts. And as a reminder to listener, Reboot is the organization that Jerry is the CEO of and that Chrystal now works at. I was speaking to that there seems to be a certain way of being at Reboot that, call it belonging is the word that you use. Like there's a sense of belonging. You said there seems to be a shared sense of values. And if you juxtapose that against what you were saying about being in law enforcement and forensics, right, that you love the work, but it didn't feel like it could hold the container for who you were becoming. So what is the container that Reboot is holding? There's something about when I listen to you or Jerry or whoever's on one of the Reboot podcasts, there's this quality of like, ooh, I want some of that.
Yeah, it's a really special place. I'll say that, it starts with, at Reboot, we say better humans make better leaders. And we
Mm,
all deeply believe that. And, we believe that in our one-on-one work with clients. We believe it in our facilitation work that we do at the boot camps. I mentioned the immersive retreat that I went on, and, we still have those boot camps. And I don't know how they have quite created this magic, but like, and I use that word very intentionally, but the magic permeates the relationships that we have with one another, and the relationships that we have with ourselves. Um, you know, it's like, it's so hard to describe. It's almost like trying to describe how wet water is. um, uh, but this has been a beautiful, like, curation and tapestry of individuals with very different backgrounds, who come together. I mean, we do all have very different backgrounds, and the magic and the tapestry of us really work. And one of my colleagues loves to use a metaphor about jazz music, and that we're all like playing our tunes and playing our own instruments, but it's, it's symphonic, and it's um there's no script that's written for it. It's just the beauty of the music of us coming together. And so I love just hearing you say that it permeates and kind of infuses. It really comes through in the podcast. It really comes through in the expression of the reboot work. And that's what we try to bring. That is, I mean, it is who we are. It's not about the doing. It just is an expression of us that shows up.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know if I really answered your question, but
Well, I think that if I may, with a little reflection here, but sometimes when folks ask me about what coaching is, I have a really hard time because there's some basic distinctions you could make. So a lot of people ask, so what's the difference between coaching and therapy? And a lot of people say therapy is more focused on your past, coaching is more oriented towards the future that you're building, or the person you're aspiring to become. Coaching is more action oriented, therapy is more understanding yourself. And I don't know, I don't know if words can do justice. That sometimes humans, we're cute, we try and come up with uh things that our mind can grasp, but sometimes our mind can't grasp. Like belonging is a tough one to me, for to slap some language around what it is. You kind of, there are some ways you could describe it, but it's also a felt sense, and it's also it's something deeper, and culture is like that too. So
yeah.
I think, coaching in a lot of ways is helping. To me, it's like helping people make contact with things that are hard to make contact with up here in our head a lot of the time. And I mean, that's how I'm experiencing your answer. It's like it's a little bit ephemeral, but you can just, when you're there, you kind of just know it.
Yeah. You know it and you feel it. There is absolutely the felt sense of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can feel it even just in hearing the words that you reflected.
Hmm.
And I'm also just noticing how hard it was for me to put words to it, but I could like feel the feeling. And there are certain things for which, like, I don't necessarily want to put language around.
Hmm.
It's like it feels like a fool's errand. Like, it, it's like the sense of awe that can just come from it, that doesn't really want language. It just wants the deep feeling
Hmm.
and the heart and the body, the emotion. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, I think a lot about belonging. I think a lot about what it feels to be at Reboot, and what we're trying to create in the world. And, we talk a lot about love, safety, and belonging. And yeah, I want more. I want
Yeah.
more of that in the world.
Yeah.
And I want my clients to feel it, and I want our organizations to feel it. And so yeah, that's very much a call. And as we're talking about it, I'm also thinking back to uh my previous work, and where I felt belonging, and creating that container for like more of it, but also recognizing where there were limits to it. So yeah.
Well, in a lot of ways, I'm guessing that someone that engages to work with you or is hiring Reboot for facilitation to go over culture, uh, ways of shifting the organization. I'm imagining that when someone engages reboot, they know that they're digging in a little bit. It's not just a couple of tools and tactics that are, you know, three-step process to make belonging happen. So what does it look like to dig in? Like, how do you, as a coach or a facilitator, uh help someone like feel into what belonging means to them?
Mm. So it's interesting that you asked this because I haven't really thought about this like really specifically. Um, and I'm trying to think like what conversations do we have around belonging? And is that almost a does it feel like taboo or too vulnerable
Hmm.
for some folks to even talk about it? And for for some people like that is the case. But um it starts with creating the container. Uh is there safety there? And then finding out what matters. Like what actually matters to the person, what matters to the group, and using that as a way in. Um oh my gosh, you ask a specific question and I can't remember what it was, and now I feel like I'm drifting. So
No, this is, well, it's establishing belonging is, there's a lot to it, but I think it sounds like the initial point of contact, if establishing belonging feels a little too big, too vulnerable, is, well, what matters to you, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Which is a great start point. One of the first coaching exercises I ever did with the first coach that I engaged to work with was establishing my core values, just writing down
Mhm.
3 to 5 things that mattered to me and describing why they were personally important to me. And in my experience, that takes some digging too, because I was like, I have no idea what matters to me. I'm kind of just doing, doesn't everyone just kind of go to college and then you get a job and you do the job and you start a family? Like, I don't know what matters to me. So this is like, could be really courageous work to start opening yourself up to what matters personally to me.
Right. Yeah, it's a great question that we do ask. I think most of us ask that question like, initially. And we stay oriented to what matters to a person. And then, there's the piece where we also know that love, safety, and belonging are such core human needs.
Mm.
And when when you're working with someone who's like, no, I don't need that, like that might deserve a little inquiry. Like, let's talk about that. um because I think, if there's a leader that doesn't prioritize or see those as important, there may be some misalignment within the team or within the group, because a lot of folks need those. Those are core needs, and those are actually what help us have healthy, sustainable teams and organizations. And so, being able to unpack some of those ideas, what really matters to you, how do you feel about this? What is the felt sense of love, safety, and belonging within your team or within your organization? And maybe that's something that we want to lean into. And what is the feedback that you've gotten? Uh, have you had a 360? What is your team saying? Because if those are things that are not present, uh, we can work with those. And, again, moving back to our better leaders make better humans, meeting those cores of love, safety, and belonging is part of our shared values. It's part of how we work, and it is integral to what we do and how we operate.
So I think under within, there's a couple of things. One is the body has come up several times in this conversation, and I know that you have done some work in somatic experiencing with
Mhm.
our shared friend Kara.
Yeah.
This is a huge question, but I mean, why do you think it's so important to incorporate the body in coaching, in making transformation and making changes and shifts in our life?
Oh gosh. Well, in terms of transformation and shifts, like the body has to believe it. It's not something that just happens in your head. You don't just decide one day, okay, I'm going to transform. Like you have to bring your body along with you. Um, our bodies hold so much history and information and sensing. And we've used the term the felt sense.
Yeah.
And like that is really important. And so trusting that our bodies also need to be there for our transformational process just feels like yes. I I can't imagine doing this work without involving the body in some way. Um, where I've seen the biggest transformational shifts, either with clients or even within myself, have been once I have allowed my body to come into it. And, sometimes we discount what our bodies might be telling us. Uh, often, and thinking back even to my experience in forensics, and I talked about like leveling up and something in me wanting more of a challenge as I started to promote, and even with the move into coaching, my body knew before my mind did. My body knew before I could articulate the words, before I had a clear sense, because something felt like it was out of alignment. Something felt like I need something else. And so it feels really good to trust that sense. And, I work with a lot of clients about like, when they need to make a decision, I'm like, what is your intuition telling you? What is your gut telling you? And I often invite people to close their eyes, to cut out the visual noise and, everything else that they see, or even to come out of their head and come into their bodies. So yeah, like I think it's just such a key part of transformation. And, we know this through neuroplasticity and, so much of the somatic work that there are many amazing practitioners and teachers that are teaching us about. So yeah.
It's a really random example that's coming to mind for me, but it's illustrative of a lot of the times that my head has been saying yes and my body has been saying no. I was in a workshop. What was a transformational workshop? It was like if you're familiar with Landmark, this kind of weekend experience where the collective group is examining the beliefs and the box that we put ourselves in, and that we actually have a choice to adopt a new set of belief systems if we want to transform and change. And I was in the hot seat. This must have been in 2021. So I had started to immerse myself in personal development work, but a lot of what I was doing was in the head and had cognitive behavioral therapy flavors to it, right? Like if I have a negative thought, I can always pattern interrupt and interject with a positive thought. And I think that there's a level of change that can happen there, like kind of reframing, shifting, power positive thinking type of thing. But anyway, I was in the hot seat. I hadn't yet started this podcast. And when I was examining one thing that I wanted in my life, but that I hadn't done yet, I said, I want to have a podcast, but I haven't started yet. And I believe the facilitator she asked something along the lines of, what's at risk if you were to start a podcast? And my mind immediately went, nothing. I'm ready to go. And she goes, well, you don't have a podcast right now. So there is like, let's not bypass this. Let's slow this down a little bit. I'm not asking you to ignore the limiting belief or whatever. Like what's here right now? And I think I don't remember exactly the realization I came to, but if I'm in touch with that, what was happening was I wasn't allowing myself to be scared.
Mm.
I had a lot of fear. Like starting a podcast was really scary for me, but I had learned years bad. Don't do that. Reframe it, jump into something else, take action, but don't feel fear. And that to me speaks a lot about the power of somatic work, where my body is over and over again communicating something to me, right? It's like, this is scary, unfamiliar, uncharted territory. Please feel me. And my mind is going, nope, on to the next, on to the next. And what seemed to happen for me over time, this is all me speaking to the efficacy of somatic work. But so what seemed to happen to me over time is I would just get exhausted. Like I felt like my mind was driving everything. And eventually I'd crash and like randomly burst out into tears or go on these random splurges of like, all right, I'm going to invest in this personal development thing and do this thing, and I need to do that challenge. And it's just like, oh, I was never allowing myself to be where I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I say all that to just say somatic work is super important. If we try and bypass what our body is communicating to us, whether it's emotions, whatever you want to call it, felt sense, intuition, it's
Mhm.
probably going to catch up to us. It seems like it always does.
I so appreciate your sharing that, because that also made me think, like, wow, you were actually carrying all this fear in your body.
Mhm.
And carrying fear in your body is not just carrying an emotion, it is actually carrying hormones
Mm,
and all sorts of other stuff that you may not even be aware of. And until you actually decide to go there and to let yourself feel it and acknowledge where it is actually sitting in your body and where you are holding it, and the fact that it is in your body at all, then you can begin to release it.
mhm.
It's that subtle shift in like changing that relationship and acknowledging, oh, this is what is actually here. Like, now I can actually work with this, I can actually let it go.
Yes.
That's great. Thanks for uh sharing that piece about the fear around the podcast. I really hear that as like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And that was, I mean, I hadn't yet started working with the leadership coach that I now work with, but almost my entire journey has been let my body let my body feel what it's communicating to me.
Mhm.
Stop trying to bypass all the stuff that you're feeling, the anger, the fear. And what I've since learned is that cutting off the emotions I don't want to feel also cuts off the emotions that I do want to feel, right? Joy, excitedness, creativity, like all of that is blocked off if I'm trying to also block off sadness, fear, anger, even despair, grief, right? Like all the different emotions are all communicating something really important. And it seems like without somatic work, we don't really have much access to them. We can start to make sense of it in our head, but it's just not the same as really fully feeling.
So true. And that mirrors a lot of what I shared earlier about my work in forensics and
Mm,
how I actually needed my body to be present in those
yeah.
moments. And I needed to actually acknowledge what I was feeling and like see it and know that it's real, so that I wouldn't shut it off and um, become hardened in a way that wasn't helpful and like actually didn't feel good. So, yeah.
Yeah. So as I transition just a little bit here, Crystal, it seems like there have been a lot of different experiences in what's called the last 5 years that have made a big impact on you. Like I could really feel the way that when you were leading the facilitation or the training with Jerry, and you said within the first 5-10 seconds, I just felt like I'm home, that had a really big impact on you. And I would love to hear you another experience that I'm really curious about, because I'm imagining it combines a lot of the things that I have written down here that we could talk about. There's connection to yourself, connection to nature because you're alone, you're outside, and you did a vision quest for 3 days alone in the wilderness without food. And that was in May. 4 days, 4 days. That's all right. No joke. I have the longest I fasted, and granted, it was not away from technology, so that's a whole other layer to what you did in May. The longest I fasted without food is about 40 hours. I think I went 41 hours one time. And I think there's a lot of we can learn a lot about ourselves when we break the pattern of doing, 3 meals a day or whatever the thing that we just assume absolutely has to happen. If we cut that off, we can learn a lot. So this in so many ways, it probably shifted the way that you look at your reliance on technology, reliance on food, reliance on people. What would you say, with a little bit of reflection afterwards? Like, how do you look at the experience of doing that 4 day, not 3 day, but 4 day Vision Quest?
I'm sorry, can you ask me the question one more time? I
Yes. Yeah.
was
What?
overwhelmed by the feeling that, when you said that, you brought back so much. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. With some reflection, what did you most learn from doing that Vision Quest? And maybe if it's helpful for you, you could talk about like what made you seem to answer calls a lot in your life too. What was the call, and what did you learn from doing it?
Mm. Well, the call was that, I've been on this journey of personal exploration um, for a number of years now. And I knew that I wanted to go out and do a vision fast. I didn't know when it was going to be, but like I heard the call pretty strongly within about the last year. And I think what was calling me to it was just the experience of going away, being quiet, being by myself, and seeing what happened. Like really wanting to know what is here for me at this time in my life, and what are the things that have been swirling around that I need to really head towards, like without the noise and without um I needed to be I needed to not have any distractions. Um and I knew that I wanted to do this, and I knew I wanted to be in the desert, which is why I ended up in New Mexico. So yeah, I mean it felt like I knew that I would do it at some point, but I think the readiness really came with the questions that I was holding about, like, what now? I left that career. I'm in a new one. Um, I'm stepping more fully into myself. I mean, I had set some intentions around really finding a fuller participation in my own life and in my own like beingness. And so I thought that this experience would help me move towards that. I was also really drawn to just the idea of really being alone and seeing what happened without food. We did have water and electrolytes, but without all of the trappings of everything, no phone, no books, no timepiece. For me, no journal.
Hmm.
I'm a big journaler. I
Yeah.
love writing, and I knew that the journal would be a crutch for me. And so to be just alone in nature for those 108 hours just felt like this will give me an opportunity to really listen and to hear what I'm being called towards, and to see if I'll actually like move towards that. Like, what happens afterwards? Am I actually going to move towards whatever happens? So that's what those are the things that pulled me toward the experience.
Hmm.
Um, and then I can share a little bit about like what it's like,
Yeah.
if that'd be
Yeah.
helpful.
And what you learned.
Yeah, and what I learned. So for me, one of the things that I learned from my time alone on the land was I learned um, what it's really like to feel very stripped down and to have life be like really bare bones and to see what's there when you take everything away. I learned like the economy of movement when you don't, when
Mhm.
you're not eating for 4 days. Um, you know, I felt weak. I felt weak for most of it. It was strange. I didn't particularly feel hungry. I think because I had prepared my body enough and I was like, okay, you're not going to eat for like 4.5 days. So don't even think about food. That's like a fool's errand. Don't do that. Um, and but just the economy that comes from like, I'm really weak. I need to conserve my energy in a way that where I can sustain this, but everything was slower. It was like time didn't matter anymore. I didn't have a timepiece. So I was like trying to read the sun in the sky. I mean, the days were incredibly long. The nights were even longer. And it just taught me like, what do I actually need to do? And where am I moving in my life? Where is there like thrash that there doesn't actually need to be? Where can I actually slow down and calm down and listen? And so I think that's one of the big takeaways that I had. And I did this quest with a group. So even though I was alone, there was the feeling of being supported, having guides that knew where we were, having a buddy system where even though we didn't see the other folks on the quest, um, feeling that support. And that was really something that I needed to see again and be reminded of in my own life.
Mhm.
So there was a learning there, and then also just getting some affirmation about what I'm doing. I have not for 1 second since I left forensics, I have not regretted it in any way, and I'm so glad that I did it. But there was actually a lot that I needed to let go of. And so the ceremony that I was able to engage in, the time away, um, w- really helped me see the things I needed to lay to rest, things from my old life, things that have been sticking with me. So um, I, those were the learnings that I had that just felt really big for me.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're willing, what's maybe one or two things that you laid to rest, that you put down as you really let go of, what was in the past and are emerging into this new future, this new Chrystal.
Yeah. Well, one was, it's really hard to do some of the work that I did in forensics and to still carry those stories
Mhm.
with me. And there was a way in which I was carrying some of those stories that there's like an old tape that was running. And uh, I've had a lot of dreams. I've had a lot of dreams since I left forensics. Um, in some of those dreams, it's about like all of a sudden I'm thrust back into the old work. I'm asked to respond to a crime scene. I'm asked to help solve something, help figure something out. And that was becoming an old tape. And so those dreams, while they felt like gifts and while I was always able to show up and do what I needed to do, I really needed to let go. I really needed to let go of that. Um, and so that's one of the things that I was able to do is just really feel like I came to some closure and really stepped into the final stages of the transition around not doing that work anymore and knowing that it's not mine to do. I've known that intellectually
Mhm.
since I stepped away. Like I know it, and I've really been there. But the final step was letting my body know it.
Mhm.
And so in that experience on this quest for me, um, that is when my body really knew that that work was done. So that's one of the things that I needed to let go of.
Oh, that
I
resonates a
just
lot.
watching, yeah, yeah. Um, I think the other thing that I needed to step into a new relationship with, um, and we've talked a little bit about belonging already, but as as a Black woman, as a descendant of enslaved Africans, uh, who were brought to this country, like I have felt a lot of ancestor grief, and really trying to work with the feelings that that brings up, and constantly, like, having that live in me, having that live in my body. And there was a way in which I needed to do some work, just so I feel like I can survive. So I can survive the you know, intergenerational trauma. Um, my dad was a Black Panther in Chicago in the 1960s and 70s. And so that very much lives in me. Um, and I've also been doing some client work in the South, and the South has been a really difficult place for me to go. And I knew that there was something in that relationship that I actually needed to change. Like, there was something calling me, like, if you're gonna if you're gonna be in the South, like, I can't have this grip me in the way that it currently is.
Mm.
And so part of my work was to really hear those voices, and I don't know, think, meditate, have some ceremony around what it means to reckon with the voices, and how to have them not be haunting in a way that is disturbing my soul. So I think that's the other big thing. And I've been doing a lot of work, and like the ancestor call feels big. As I watch this generation, I talked early, the first question you asked me was about who is around my dinner table. And I talked about being with my grandparents, and so many of all of their brothers and sisters have passed away. And these are the people that were around that table who would come to our meals. And even every year as I go back, there are fewer and fewer people. And so I'm thinking a lot about lineage. And I have two daughters who are 11 and 15. And so I'm thinking about that. And um, my dear friend and colleague has also written a book that I've been a contributor on, called Reunion: Leadership and the Longing to Belong, um, by Jerry Colonna, which is forthcoming. It will be out in the fall of this year, but he asked me to contribute to that book. And so I wrote a piece for the afterword. And so that was with me when I was out on the quest. And yeah, that's the other piece that I felt like I needed to manage and do some work around, grief work, figuring out how to move forward.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the other piece of work that was really important for me.
Mm. So what's been supportive for you in making contact with things that are really difficult to make contact with? So be
Mm,
it ancestors that were deeply traumatized as slaves, just the general feeling of being in the South and the enormity of all the terrible atrocities that happened there. When looking at something that big, it takes me, it probably takes a really powerful healer to be able to hold all of that and be able to be with you as you confront, for maybe the first time in your life, confront really painful things.
mm.
What has been supportive for you?
Part of it has been leaning into grief work.
Mhm.
Uh, which is something that I have wanted to avoid like the plague. But but no, that has been absolutely critical, that I've been on that journey, and doing some of that work prepared me. Um, Having borne witness to what I did in forensics, and sort of holding that work and entering that sacred space, like, that reminded me that I know how to do this. Even when I thought I couldn't, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to go back to these difficult places. It was like, wait, I've done this before. I know how to do this. So calling upon some of those skills that I learned early on was really helpful. And I think also, just to draw on another forensic example, there is a way in which, because of all of the work that I did, my relationship with places has been um, my relationship with places has been challenged. Uh, when I did that sort of work, I went to places all over the state, some even in my own neighborhood. And so, our bodies build an association with these places. And there was a point at which I could feel my world becoming smaller when I would go through these places, or go by these places, or I'd remember these places. And one of the things that as I recognized that my world was becoming smaller, I was like, no, 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 I can't do that. That is not a place I want to be. I need my world to feel big and expansive, and I actually have to be able to reckon and go back. And so I actually, several years ago, took myself through, and this is before I even left forensics. I took myself through a ceremony where I went back to a really challenging place. It was a place of one of the worst crime scenes that I had ever been to, and that, was still like super gripping. And I went back, the idea for me was to go back in a way that I couldn't go the first time, because it was so painful. And I had a dear friend accompany me to go back. And what came up, we drove along this road and we stopped, and I was suddenly just overwhelmed with all of the emotions that I couldn't feel the first time. And then I thought, okay, like, this is the medicine here. This is the right thing for me to do, because it felt weird to go back. I was like, do I even want to do this? This is really bizarre. And then I realized, as we retraced the road up to this place, that I could really feel what I couldn't feel before. And it was so cleansing and so healing. And she got out of the car and she said, I'm going to wait here while you walk back to the place. And it was a wooded area. And I just remember taking this like slow, deliberate walk. And I was back there, at the scene, but I was like here in the present moment. And I was just noticing what was there. And, I touched the rock wall, I touched the dirt, I could see all the greenery. And that, for me to be able to go back in that way, just felt really healing. And so how that applies to now is that experience taught me that I could go back to a difficult place, that I didn't have to avoid it, and that it was possible. And, I was supported. I had the conversation that I couldn't have. I allowed myself to really feel in, full 3-4 dimensions, all the things I couldn't feel before. And that was what I needed. And so now, you know, fast forward to current time, as I think about this journey with my ancestors and with this reckoning, I feel like it is, I have more capacity to go back. And I don't know what it'll look like. I mean, there's actually kind of a pilgrimage journey that I'll make during one of these trips in the coming months. But I feel like it's gonna touch on some of those things that I learned a few years ago. Just bringing some ceremony to it and approaching it with reverence, and also knowing that I am supported and I'm in the present moment, and that things are different for me now. And yeah, so that's the heart that I want to bring in as I go back. Yeah.
Well, Chrystal, thank you so much for sharing that. There's a couple of things that feel important for me to underscore about what you've shared. And I think one of the first things I'm in touch with here is I I know a decent amount of people in my life who have quote unquote not been through anything traumatic in their life. And what I'm hearing, like this is what's important about what you just shared, is that we all, and this is by no means diminishing, some people have been through way harsher, way more traumatic. So I am not belittling that. But someone who is dismissive of, I haven't really been through anything in my life, if you go back one generation, two generations, we all have something that is probably living within us that is unconsciously influencing the way that we act. And what I'm hearing from what you said is that at one point it's unbearable. And so the adaptive move is to not feel the thing, whatever the pain is, we just avoid it. But it gets stuck in us if we don't make our own repair and healing move around it. And so in another way of saying building the capacity to be with it is revisiting it from a later point where you've already built more skills, more literacy around healing. What seems to happen on the other side of that is you're able to let go of that stuckness that lived in you, which isn't to forget about it and say that it never happened. It actually gives you more strength to look at other hard things, right? So it's like I'm saying this as a triple underscore of how important the work that you're doing is, that I think we could all learn from it. Every single person listening is in some way influenced, but because we're all part, the water we are swimming in as a society is one of racism, colonialism, patriarchy, right? There's so much oppression and trauma that has happened over the years that it's unfortunately it's pretty inescapable. Even if it didn't happen directly to us, it is influencing all of us, is influencing the systems that we're operating in, the organizations we work in, everything. And so that healing work is almost, to me, it's mandatory if you want to live a full, enriched, vital life.
Yeah. It's so well said. And to recognize that like other people might need this.
Mm-hmm.
One may not feel like they need it, but like the importance of doing the work, and recognizing what it might unlock is really big, and it gives us so much capacity. It's a capacity building move. um we are all humans that will experience suffering at some point. And if we ourselves aren't directly experiencing some sort of traumatic suffering, someone in our lives will. And do we have the capacity to see them and support them and hold them in that? That's part of this work. And I love that, just drawing the parallel between like, even if it's not this, it's like it's something else.
Mm-hmm.
I as someone who has worked with what the worst of what we as humans can do to one another, I think there is tremendous healing work that we are all capable of and that we all have the capacity for. And that's what this journey feels like to me. And so regardless of how one might want to take the journey or what relevance it may feel like they have or don't have, like, yeah, just walking towards it. Just if this earth was filled with humans who all had that skill and capacity, things would
Mm.
feel so different. So different.
Well said. And what I was going to say, which you've really summed up there, is this feels like the path forward for us as a species and the planet. If
Mhm.
we had what a world it would be if we all had that capacity.
Mhm.
So as we move
Yeah.
towards the back end here, Chrystal, I've been having such a blast, but I know that we're pushing on the time
Mm.
boundary. So is there anything that we haven't spoken about so far today that feels important for you to bring into the conversation now?
Um, no, not really. I think we we covered so much. It feels really good.
Yeah.
Mm.
All right. Well, I just have a couple more things that I want to run
Yeah.
through with you. And every
Mhm.
episode, I always raise awareness for an organization of my guest choice. And please forgive me if I mispronounce it, but you've selected the organization, is it
Econi Ranch.
Econe Ranch. So if
Yeah.
you could you say a word or two about Econe Ranch?
Yeah. This is the Econi Ranch is in South Central Washington. And um, the mission of the organization is to provide um, outdoor experiences and space for folks who love the earth deeply. Um, they have, stewardship of this incredible watershed. There's a beautiful canyon. Um, they run a summer camp for kids and an equestrian camp and lots of educational opportunities for organizations and for groups who want to be out, uh, out on the land in nature. And there's also a natural burial cemetery that's there. Um, I got to I got to do a program there last year that was really transformational for me. Um, it was actually a workshop of looking into the face of death.
Mm,
And so it was very, very fitting that that we had this natural burial cemetery to be in the midst of. But I really love and appreciate their work, and they are a nonprofit. They do fundraisers every year. Their goal is to, uh, in perpetuity, keep that land and protect it. Uh, they run this wonderful just the way that they steward and care for the land is pretty amazing. Um, they're totally self-sufficient in terms of power and all of that.
mm.
And it's just a wonderful place. And it spoke to my heart to be on that land. And so I always put out the word to support them so that they can keep on their mission of stewardship.
Yeah. Well, as a fellow lover of the outdoors and the healing power of the outdoors, I will certainly be donating. I'll make sure in the intro that I mention Econe Ranch as well and enlist the support of the listeners. And just a couple more
Be
rapid
awesome.
fire questions
Yeah,
that I love to ask. So,
sure.
what's an ordinary everyday moment that brings you great joy?
Oh my gosh. Ordinary everyday moment. Um, oh, hold on. Hold on. Sorry. I know these are rapid fire.
Take your time.
Seeing my kids smile,
Hmm.
seeing the energy that they wake up with in the morning, before the day has gotten too oppressive and crushing. Yeah, that early morning innocence and knowing that there is a day ahead to unfold, that brings me tremendous joy.
So I just have two more. I was just going to ask,
Yeah.
where would you invite folks to connect with you online?
Uh, Folks can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
They can also check out, I think I have a coaches page on the Reboot website. And I don't know what else you want there.
That's all we need. So the
Yeah.
LinkedIn page and the Reboot website. So I'll
Yeah.
make sure
LinkedIn Reboot. Hmm.
I'll definitely link to that in the show notes. I'll link to Jerry's book, which isn't out yet, Reunion, and you mentioned Krista Tippett, Reboot the Organization on Being. So I'll link to those in the show notes.
Hmm.
And the final question that I ask in every interview, Chrystal, the podcast is called Mike's Search for Meaning. And so I would love to know, in your words, what it means to live a meaningful life.
Living a meaningful life, in my words, is about living with the fullest expression of our being, of who we
Mhm.
are. Um, Whatever brings us joy, whatever that untouchable, unshakable core of us is, like to be able to get in there and then to have that expressed in the way that we show up in the world, that feels super meaningful.
Hmm.
I want that for everyone.
Yes to unshakable core. Yes to joy.
Yes. And also just a shout out to awe. I
Mm,
am reading Dacher Keltner's new book about awe, and I'm like really enjoying listening to it right now. And so I think that's another piece of the magic, is just like finding awe in, like, if I can find a little piece of that every day in my life, um, that feels really good. And I
mm,
am grateful for it and I love it. And I love waking up in the morning, just knowing that I'm going to find a little piece of that regardless of the day. Yeah.
mm. Well, awe seems to pair well with your initial loves of curiosity, inquiry, and mystery. So the beautiful way to end the conversation, Chrystal. And I so appreciated all the different directions that we took this conversation. And if you can't tell, I just think the work that you're doing is so important, and the way that you're showing up in your life is a beautiful model to how we can face. Like Glennon Doyle says, we can do hard things, and I'm hearing that in a lot of what you're sharing. We can do hard things, and hard things make us more resilient, more capable humans, more alive,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And being more alive
Absolutely.
is like, yes, that is one way that I look at life, is how can I feel more alive? And one way is doing those hard things that you've been putting off. And
Mm,
so yeah, I appreciate your willingness to step into this space bravely and vulnerably and openly. It's a gift to me to witness the way that you look at your life and your work. It's a gift to anyone who tuned in, and I'm really grateful that Kara connected us.
oh, me too. Me too. It was so good to be with you and share a little bit about myself, and yeah, just hear your beautiful reflections as
Mhm.
well. So thank you. So appreciated.
Mhm. You are so welcome. And to all the listeners, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. Take good care and lots of love. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to Mike's Search for Meaning. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, share this episode with your friends, and leave a review. I look forward to seeing you next time, my friends. And until then, stay safe, stay well, and keep living with purpose. Peace.